I myself am going to be saying this clearly. I am heterosexual. I do not identify as homosexual, but I am a Tolkien expert. And again, the expertise is through the usual methods of just going through his works, biographies, letters, and just going through the documents and trying to craft as best as possible the best interpretation on this or that topic. Now, in terms of this topic, I honestly don't see much to debate. Heterosexual romance, heterosexual relationships are pretty central to Lord of the Rings. That doesn't mean we know all the answers or you can't raise questions, and this is still an active research agenda. Nevertheless, if the question is there queer Tolkien or can there be queerness in Tolkien, we just have overwhelming evidence that the answer is no. Heterosexuality really is definitively a strong part of this mythology. It's just core to the mythology. You really can't get rid of it. But we're going to listen to Maggie Mae Fish, and she's going to bring in the counter argument. And some of what she's saying is true, some of what she's saying is false. And we're just going to shift through it and try to understand Tolkien better if we can.
This reading means a lot to queer people who already have slim pickings when it comes to depictions of same-sex love, let alone in blockbuster genre pieces, which are usually crafted to be as cishet as possible.
Someone just sent me an article. I have like a side Twitter account that is like only Hobbit content. And so people send me a lot of stuff on there, which is like just wonderful. But so like when they were shooting the movies with Sir Ian McKellen, who's like an out gay man and was out as the movies were being shot, and has been like this huge advocate, he would like coach Elijah Wood and Sean Astin to sort of like play certain scenes more romantically. And I think there's like the specific one is like Frodo wakes up in Rivendell and Sam rushes to his side and holds his hand and then kind of like blushes. And it's like, that's in the book. That is like textually, Sam runs up and then like grabs his hand, he like blushes and turns away and is just like overcome. And I think it like wasn't in the script. And Ian McKellen was like, as a gay person, this moment mattered so much to me. Like it could be taken as one thing, but I took it as something very personal. And so he like helped sort of like bring that back into the movie.
Here's another example of an artist interpreting the work in a way that meant so much to him, taking the actual text of the work and adding layers to the characters, both by staying true to the text and by including his own point of view.
All right, so several things are going on here. Now, one is she's preemptively saying that Jackson was faithful to the books. Really, there's no way these two theses can coexist. Either he was faithful or he wasn't faithful. If there was queerness, then technically, yes, he's faithful because you can see, quote, queerness in the films. And I stress this. The books do not have any queerness. No queerness. Like zero queerness. We just cannot find any. But do the movies possibly have these elements? The answer is yes. That's the movies. So the fidelity question is central. Was he being faithful? I'm just going to say no. Jackson is not being faithful. He's only being faithful to some details, to some plot points, even towards the large, broadly speaking, narrative structure. But he is really moving far away from the books in many particular cases and in many particular instances. So just asserting fidelity is not enough. You have to show it in detail, and she does not. However, in terms of what she's saying about McKellen, I do think that there's strong evidence for this, that Jackson was persuaded to skew images or lean a certain way. And Ian McKellen, at the time he was making Lord of the Rings, was openly gay. Now, how much Jackson knew about this, was he supportive? That we can still debate. But it's really hard to see some of these scenes and images without getting a kind of queer subtext. Now, that doesn't tell us anything about the books. That doesn't disturb the Tolkien mythology. I think you still have to stretch a lot of things and distort a lot of things. But is it possible to do it? Yes, I think so. But in terms of the books, we just have too much overwhelming evidence that Tolkien just was not interested in queer relationships. In fact, one of the most fascinating things is the Sam-Rose marriage, which is canonical. He tells us very explicitly that Sam and Rose are married and that it's a heterosexual marriage. But even on top of that, he says, again, for himself, that this love relationship was central. It's essential to Lord of the Rings. So this is pretty strong language. So he is saying heterosexuality, heterosexual relationships are central to Lord of the Rings. However, being a real expert as opposed to a phony expert, we have to be careful here with the evidence. We do have Arwen, we do have Aragorn, we do have Rose, we do have Sam. So we do have positive instances of heterosexuality. Again, that doesn't defeat the other side. We'd have to know and say that there's no instances at all of possible homosexuality. That's really tough to do. Nevertheless, even with the Sam Rose issue, and even though he says it's essential, as pointed out in the Megan article, Rose is a minor character, and moreover, he only created her at the last minute. He was almost done with Lord of the Rings, and then he just inserted the character. So, although in the letters he affirms it's central and essential, well, that doesn't make any sense. If this was such an essential relationship, why was she added in so late? Why is she such a minor character? It feels like he is basically foreclosing the universe from homosexuality. So on the one hand, you can say he's a heterosexist, but there's no pejorative connotation. In other words, he does have a heterosexist vision, but he doesn't have any homophobic vision. It's tough because it's not clear where he stands. It seems like he thinks heterosexuality is central to his mythology, but does he necessarily devalue queerness? No, we just don't know. He doesn't really explicitly talk about this. And certainly in the books, it's never addressed. There's no passages where explicitly queerness is being devalued or demonized. It's not like the bad guys are queer or Sauron is gay. On the other hand, we just see positive images and positive language about heterosexuality. The most honest interpretation through the text is with homosexuality. It either doesn't exist, it just does not exist, and or it's a big question mark. And we can keep doing research on it, we can still keep looking at it, but insofar as it is present, it is of such small or minor detail, it really is pointless to even keep going. But we can still find it, but it's really a fool's errand to keep trying to find it. But yes, it is true that the films do indulge in a lot of homoerotic imagery. I'm just going to take my stand and say just the book reader has no obligation to the adaptation. So if you're just a book reader and just care about the Tolkien mythology, it doesn't matter what Peter Jackson wanted. He didn't write Lord of the Rings. He doesn't have canonical status. If you enjoy those adaptations, great. If you enjoy them because they're queer, that's also great. That does not touch the text, that does not touch the books, that does not touch the core mythology. And if we have to make a decision, the core mythology is heterosexual, it is heterosexist. It doesn't necessarily imply homophobia, but it is heterosexual to the core. It does not allow for any other relationships. The only relationships really in terms of sex or romance are between a man and a woman. That's it. That's all we have. That's all that Tolkien gave us in Lord of the Rings. And even if we go beyond Lord of the Rings into the other books, we're still going to end up in the same place. It's just a very heterosexual vision he had. So insofar as you respect his vision, it is a heterosexual one. And that's where we stand. We're going to still be debating this for quite a while. So this is only a minor rejoinder to a much larger conversation over this topic. Thanks for listening.